The funniest philosopher in all of philosophy is certainly Neitzche. And this is kind of a reworking of one of his best jokes. For those of you who count, it's from Beyond Good and Evil, Aphorism 18, but I have retold it. It is a rude story about Kant. Once, in the foggy city of Königsberg, down where the ice-cold Baltic Sea breaks, there was a man who everybody knew was good. Well, he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. He only drank a pint of heady claret with his meals. He never wore elastic, only suspenders he made out of clockwork. He always went for a walk at 2:30, always for half an hour. They used to set all the clocks of Königsberg by him, and people wondered how you could have time at all without old Father Kant, Immanuel Kant, to show you the way. More than that, he wrote great books. He wrote them in geography, geometry, geology, geomancy, astrophysics, astrology, astronomy, physics, personal education, physical education, metaphysics, health and safety, health and harmony. You name it, he wrote it. A very good man indeed. And more than that, he read books. One time, they saw him going into a closet with a great book. Now, when they saw who the book was by, they all muttered, for it was by a famous, eminent Scotsman. And in those days, you had to be careful before you read a book by a Scotsman, because they were either full of bankrupt morality, threadbare economics, or coruscating concepts of corrosive nature. And this book was all three. So it was at 6 o'clock in the morning. Pepe, Kant's servant, heard it. A loud shout, in which fury was mingled with frustration, agony with ecstasy. And Pepe ran into his closet and said, "Are you all right, master?" And Kant said, "No, it is this book. It has just proved to me that God does not exist." And Pepe said, "Oh, I wish you hadn't told me that. I'll have to wash my ears out. That's blasphemy." Kant said, "Don't you worry too much. It's also proved to me something else, Pepe. It's proved to me that you don't exist." "What, me? That's personal." "Don't worry, though. As long as you keep on making the tea, nobody will notice. I'll tell you what's much worse. This book has proved to me I do not exist. And that is a huge wrench. I'm not sure how I'm going to live with this. But it's much worse than that, Pepe." "What, worse than that?" "Much worse. It's proved to me that philosophy doesn't exist. And that means I'm out of a job." "What are you going to do?" I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay in my closet and I'm going to think. I'm going to think a thought that has never been thought before. I'm going to think the thought that explains everything. And Kant stayed up there in the closet and didn't come down. And rumour spread throughout Königsberg that Kant was thinking the thought that had never been thought before. The thought that was the hardest thought ever to think. The thought that would explain everything. And people waited with bated breath. And they waited and they waited and they waited. Until at 5 o'clock in the morning, a loud bell rang through Königsberg one morning. And they all sleepily trooped down to the square. And there was old Father Kant waiting for them. And they said, "But have you done it? Have you thought that thought you were thinking? Have you thunk a thought that had never been thunk before? Have you done it?" And Kant said, "I've done more than that. I have thought the thought that nobody has thought before. I have thought the hardest thought it is possible to think. I have thought the thought that explains all thinking." And they said, "Well, are you going to tell it to us?" And Kant said, "Of course I am, and this is it. How do you think, I ask you? What is the most difficult thought you can think? I will tell you. You think by means of a thought." And everybody cheered really loudly, because you can be sure Kant, good philosopher that he was, didn't quite call it that. He called it an a priori synthetic truth, so it sounded so much better. But while everybody was cheering, suddenly a bright spark stood up and said, "All right, you've explained thought, but try and explain morality. Why shouldn't I just hit the person behind me?" And he did. And soon there was a fight throughout Königsberg, and Kant, he went back up to his closet. And he started to think again, and he spent a lot more time thinking. And all through Königsberg there was silence, punctuated only by the occasional squeal of agony as somebody hit somebody. Then Kant came down early one morning, having rung the bell and summoned them. And they came to him and said, "Have you thought that thought you were thinking? Because we're getting very bruised. We hope you've done it. Can you explain morality?" And Kant said, "Of course I can. I will now explain to you why you are moral. You have morality by means of morals." But of course he called it a categorical imperative, which sounded so much better. And everybody cheered really loudly. So Kant said, "And for my encore, I will prove to you that art exists." And they said, "No, thank you very much. 2 critiques was quite enough," and they didn't need to know about art. And anyway, they weren't going to fund it anymore, so that was okay. And Kant went back to his closet. But all the young philosophers throughout Germany, They heard of Kant and his exploits, and they all went down into the beer gardens and started to think for themselves, and came back with new faculties. We had a faculty for will, a faculty for good, a faculty for evil, a faculty to be a human, just in case you weren't. And Germany entered its glorious springtime, a springtime that lasted until the wild pipes of romanticism led it quite astray. But you know, in all this hubbub of activity, everybody forgot to ask the real question, which is surely not how are a priori synthetic truths possible, that is to you and me, how is it possible to know things have happened before they've occurred, but rather, what possible right do we have to such knowledge, and who but a liar or a philosopher would want it?